Kicked out at 17 with just $12 and a trash bag. Now my family wants to live in my $750,000 home after years of silence and lies. The cold autumn air still feels the same. It has a specific bite, a damp chill that seeps right through your jacket and settles deep in your bones. It's the same chill I felt the night my life was irrevocably split into two distinct halves, the before and the after. I was 17. The before was a life I wouldn't wish on anyone, a constant, low-grade hum of being the lesser, the unwanted, the problem. The after began with $12, a flimsy black trash bag, and the gravel crunching under my worn-out sneakers as I walked away from the only home I'd ever known. The front door clicked shut behind me, a sound as final as a gavel in a courtroom, and the porch light, my family's final, indifferent beacon, was switched off, plunging me into darkness. It's funny, the things you remember. I remember the weight of the trash bag, not heavy with possessions, because I had so few, but heavy with the symbolism of it all. My life's worth, stuffed into something meant for garbage. I remember the $12 in my pocket. A 5, a 1, and 6 wrinkled singles. Not enough for a bus ticket to anywhere meaningful, not enough for a motel room, just enough to feel like a calculated insult. My father had pressed it into my hand without meeting my eyes, his mouth a grim, tight line. My mother stood behind him, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of weary disappointment she had perfected over 17 years of looking at me. My older brother, Ethan, the golden one, the one for whom the sun rose and set, was leaning against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips. He was the reason this was happening, though at the time, I only understood it in the vague, powerless way a pawn understands the board. The official reason for my exile was a broken vase. It was an ugly, expensive thing my mother adored. Ethan had been chasing me through the house, a stupid, goading game he loved to play, and I'd stumbled, knocking it off its pedestal. He immediately stopped, his playful rage vanishing, replaced by a cold, calculating look. He pointed a finger at me and screamed for our parents. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't care that Ethan had been chasing me. They just saw the shattered porcelain and their shattered patience with their second, less perfect son. I'm done, my father had said, his voice dangerously low. I'm done with the trouble, the excuses, the constant drain. You're a man now, figure it out. A man at 17, with $12 and the clothes on my back. That first night, I walked until my feet were raw. I ended up at a 24-hour laundromat, huddled in a corner, pretending to wait for a load to finish, the chemical smell of detergent a strange comfort. Every time the door opened, I'd flinch, expecting to see them, expecting a car to pull up, for my mom to get out and say it was all a terrible mistake. But the hours ticked by, marked only by the rumble of the dryers, and the door never opened for me. The next few years are a blur of survival. I worked under the table, washing dishes, hauling trash, stocking shelves. I slept in bus stations, in homeless shelters when I could get a bed, and more often than not, in parks, using my trash bag of clothes as a pillow. The hunger was a constant companion, a dull ache that sharpened into a piercing pain. I learned to be invisible, to not draw attention, to exist in the margins. The $12 were gone in 2 days, spent on a hot meal that made me sick because my stomach wasn't used to it. The hardest part wasn't the physical hardship, it was the crushing loneliness, the feeling of being completely untethered from the world. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of a life I wasn't allowed to live. My turning point came in the form of a man named George. He owned a small, greasy spoon diner called the Corner Booth. I had been washing his windows for a couple of bucks a day, and one afternoon, he saw me shivering in the rain, my jacket soaked through. He didn't say much, just grunted and waved me inside. He sat me down in a booth and placed a bowl of steaming soup in front of me. I ate it so fast I barely tasted it. When I was done, he just looked at me, his eyes kind but weary. "You got a place to sleep tonight, kid?" he asked. I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He sighed, ran a hand over his bald head, and pointed to a door at the back. "There's a small room upstairs. It ain't much, but it's warm and it's dry. You can work it off in the kitchen." That room became my sanctuary. It was little more than a closet with a cot, but it had a lock on the door. For the first time in years, I felt safe. George became the father I never had. He was gruff and didn't waste words, but he taught me how to work. He taught me about responsibility, about showing up on time, about taking pride in a job well done, even if it was just scrubbing pots. He encouraged me to get my GED, letting me study in a quiet booth after the diner closed. With his quiet support, I started to feel human again. I discovered I had a knack for fixing things. The diner's aging refrigerator, the flickering neon sign, the wobbly tables, I found a strange satisfaction in making them work again. George noticed and started giving me more complex tasks. One day, he brought in an old wooden chair with a broken leg. "Think you can fix this?" he'd asked. I spent a week on it, carefully sanding, joining, and staining the wood. When I was done, you couldn't even tell it had been broken. That chair sparked something in me. I started visiting the library, devouring books on carpentry and woodworking. I used my meager savings to buy old, broken furniture from thrift stores and restore them in the back alley behind the diner. I sold my first piece, a beautifully restored oak dresser, for $50. It felt like $1 million. That was the real beginning of the after. I saved every penny. I worked in the diner during the day and worked on my furniture at night. I rented a small garage, then a larger workshop. My side hustle became a small business. I specialized in custom furniture, and word of my craftsmanship spread. People appreciated the care and detail I put into every piece. It was more than just a job, it was my art. It was proof that I could create something beautiful and whole out of what was broken. Years passed. 10 years, to be exact. 10 years of grinding, of working 18-hour days, of pouring every ounce of my energy, my pain, and my hope into my business. I never looked back. I never tried to contact my family. As far as I was concerned, they had ceased to exist on that cold autumn night. My business, Phoenix Woodcrafts, flourished. I hired employees. I bought a warehouse. I was successful beyond my wildest dreams. And with that success, I bought myself a home. Not just a house, but a home. A beautiful, custom-built place on 3 acres of land, with large windows that let in the morning light and a workshop in the back that was bigger than the house I grew up in. It cost $750,000, a sum so astronomical to the 17-year-old me that it would have been laughable. It was my fortress, my testament. Every beam, every polished floorboard, was a symbol of my resilience. It was a place built on my own terms, a place where no one could ever throw me out. I had been living there for about 6 months when the letter arrived. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, my name and address written in my mother's elegant, familiar script. My heart hammered against my ribs. For 10 years, there had been nothing. Absolute silence. I had assumed they didn't know where I was, or simply didn't care. Seeing her handwriting felt like a ghost touching my skin. I almost threw it away, but a morbid curiosity, a need to know, made me tear it open. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation. It was filled with feigned remorse and syrupy nostalgia for a happy childhood that never existed. "My dearest son," it began. She wrote about how they had missed me every day, how they had prayed for my safety, how they had always loved me. She painted a picture of parents who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of anger, a mistake they had regretted for a decade. She said they had tried to find me, but I had vanished. The lies were so thick I felt like I was choking on them. Then came the real reason for the letter. Ethan, their perfect, golden son, had not fared so well. He had, according to my mother, been the victim of a series of unfortunate business deals. He had lost everything. And in their boundless generosity, my parents had co-signed his loans, using their own house as collateral. Now, the bank was foreclosing. They were losing their home. They were desperate. The final paragraph was the punchline. "We heard through a friend of a friend about your incredible success," she wrote. "We are so immensely proud of you. We always knew you had it in you. We were wondering, darling, if we could possibly come and stay with you for a little while?" Just until we get back on our feet. Your house looks so large, surely you have a spare room or two for your loving family. I read the letter 3 times, a cold, familiar fury building in my chest. Loving family? The family that threw me out with a trash bag? The family that left me to fend for myself at 17 without a second thought? The audacity was breathtaking. They didn't want a son, they wanted a lifeboat. My immediate instinct was to burn the letter and never reply. But something held me back. A part of me, the wounded 17-year-old boy who still lived somewhere inside me, needed to see them. I needed to look them in the eye. I needed to understand. Not to forgive, but to finally close this chapter. I agreed to meet them, not at my house, but at a neutral location, a coffee shop in a town halfway between us. When I walked in, I saw them huddled at a small table. They looked older, more careworn. My father's hair was gray, my mother's face etched with lines of worry. Ethan looked defeated, his usual arrogance replaced by a sullen resentment. My mother burst into tears the moment she saw me. She rushed forward to hug me, but I sidestepped her, holding up a hand. Her performance stopped instantly, her face hardening for a fraction of a second before the mask of sorrow returned. We sat down, and they launched into their well-rehearsed script. They were sorry, so sorry. It was the biggest regret of their lives. My father, the man who hadn't even looked at me as he cast me out, spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying about me. Ethan mumbled something that sounded like an apology, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. They talked about their financial ruin, about Ethan's bad luck. They laid it on thick, the tale of woe, the appeal to pity. And then they asked again, this time to my face. Your house is our only hope, my mother pleaded, her eyes welling up again. We have nowhere else to go. We're family. The word family hung in the air between us, ugly and twisted. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw them not as parents or a brother, but as strangers. Strangers with a shared history of cruelty. And I realized I didn't just want to say no. I wanted to know why. Why the vase? Why was that the final straw? It never made sense. Tell me about the vase, I said, my voice quiet but firm. They exchanged a nervous glance. Oh, that, my mother said dismissively. It was a silly thing. We were just so stressed, and you were being so difficult back then. Difficult how? I pressed. You know, my father chimed in, his tone condescending. Always moody, getting into trouble at school, not applying yourself like Ethan. It was the same old story, the narrative they had built to justify their neglect. But I didn't let it go. I watched Ethan, who was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Something was off. I decided to bluff. I know about Grandma Rosa's inheritance, I said, the words coming out of nowhere. I had a grandmother, my mother's mother, who had passed away about a year before I was kicked out. I barely knew her, but I remembered she was fond of me. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. My mother gasped. My father's face went pale. And Ethan, for the first time, looked directly at me, his eyes filled with pure, unadulterated panic. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't know the details, but I knew that was it. That was the real reason. I went home that night and became a detective. I started with my grandmother's will. It took some digging and a call to a probate lawyer, but I got a copy. What I found made the blood drain from my face. My grandmother had left a trust fund of $50,000. It wasn't a fortune, but to a 17-year-old, it was the entire world. And it was left specifically to me, to be accessed for my education or to help me start a business when I turned 21. My parents were the trustees. The fine print was clear: if I were to become estranged from the family or could not be located, the trustees had the discretion to absorb the funds to cover the financial burden of their other child's upbringing and education. It was all there, in black and white. They hadn't kicked me out because of a broken vase. They had kicked me out to steal my inheritance. They had engineered my estrangement to get their hands on my money, which they then handed over to their precious Ethan for his unfortunate business deals. The $12 wasn't just an insult, it was a carefully calculated transaction. They were buying my future for $12. The rage I felt was so pure, so absolute, it was almost clarifying. All the years of feeling worthless, of believing I was the problem, of thinking I deserved to be thrown away, it was all a lie, a meticulously crafted lie for money. But the story didn't end there. As I dug deeper, another piece of my past clicked into place. George. My savior, the diner owner. He had passed away a few years ago, peacefully in his sleep. He had left the diner to me in his will, the foundation upon which I had built my new life. I had always wondered why he had been so kind to a random, street-worn kid. While going through some of his old papers he had left in a box in the diner's office, I found a stack of letters. They were from my Grandma Rose. In the letters, she spoke of her love for me and her deep distrust of my parents' financial judgment. In the very last letter, written just a month before she died, she told George, who I now learned was her distant cousin, about the trust fund. She wrote, "Please, George, if anything ever happens, keep an eye on my boy. I fear his parents will see him only as an obstacle to what they want." George hadn't just been a kind stranger. He had been a guardian angel, a promise keeper. My grandmother had seen what was coming and had put a safety net in place for me. My own parents had stolen my inheritance, but my grandmother and a man I barely knew had saved my life. I had one more piece of the puzzle to find. I needed to know Ethan's exact role. I found his ex-girlfriend, Sarah, through social media. I reached out, explaining who I was. She was hesitant at first, but when I told her they were trying to move in with me, she agreed to talk. We met, and she told me everything. Ethan had been pathologically jealous of me. Even though he was the golden child, he hated any attention I received, even the small amount my grandmother gave me. He knew about the trust fund before I did. According to Sarah, it was Ethan who concocted the entire plan. He was the one who convinced our parents that I was a lost cause, that I would just waste the money. He orchestrated fights, broke things and blamed me, creating a pattern of difficult behavior. The broken vase was just the finale he had been waiting for. He had pushed me, knowing I would stumble, knowing exactly how our parents would react. He had watched me walk into the dark with a trash bag, knowing he had my $50,000 in his future. Sarah said the guilt of it was one of the reasons they broke up. Armed with the will, the letters, and Sarah's story, I was ready. I called my mother and told them to come to my house the next day. I told them we needed to discuss the living arrangements. They arrived right on time, a U-Haul truck pulling up behind their beat-up sedan, a testament to their breathtaking presumption. They walked into my home, their eyes wide, greedily taking in the high ceilings, the custom woodwork, the life I had built from the ashes of the one they had burned down. My mother was already pointing out which room would be hers. Ethan was eyeing my workshop with a covetous glint in his eye. "It's even more beautiful than we imagined," my mother gushed. "You've done so well for yourself. We're so proud." I let them walk around for a few minutes, letting them soak in the fantasy, letting them taste the life they felt entitled to. Then, I asked them to sit down in the living room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just calmly laid a folder on the coffee table in front of them. "Before we discuss your accommodations," I said, my voice eerily steady, "I thought we could clear up some old business." I opened the folder. The first thing I showed them was a copy of Grandma Rose's will, with the clause about the trust fund highlighted. I watched the blood drain from their faces. Next, I showed them the letters between my grandmother and George, her distant cousin, the man who owned the diner where my new life began. I told them how he had taken me in, fulfilling a promise she had asked of him. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Finally, I told them about my conversation with Sarah. I recounted, in detail, Ethan's methodical plan to have me cast out. The broken vase, the lies, the manipulation. I looked directly at Ethan, who was now ashen, trembling. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence filled the beautiful room I had built. The masks were gone. There was no more fake remorse, no more tears. There was only the ugly, naked truth of their greed and betrayal. My mother was the first to speak, her voice a pathetic whisper. We were desperate. He needed my future? I cut her off, my voice finally cracking with the cold fury I had kept locked away for a decade. You sold my life for $50,000 and then threw me away with the trash. You didn't just kick me out. You tried to erase me. You left me for dead so your precious, perfect son could fail on my dime. My father started to bluster, trying to find some justification, but the words died in his throat. Ethan just stared at the floor, the golden boy tarnished beyond repair. I stood up. The discussion about living arrangements is over, I said. There are no arrangements. You are not welcome in this house. This house was built with the sweat and tears you caused. Every board, every nail, is a monument to what I survived in spite of you. I walked to the front door and opened it. Your U-Haul is waiting, I said. They just sat there, stunned into immobility. My mother began to sob, real tears this time, tears of self-pity and loss. You can't do this to us, she cried. We're your family. Where will we go? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I took out a $10 bill and 2 ones. I walked over and placed them on the coffee table, next to the folder that held their sins. Here's $12, I said, my voice void of all emotion. And I'm sure you can find a trash bag for your things. Now, get out of my house. They finally moved, stumbling out like ghosts, their greedy dreams turning to dust around them. I watched the U-Haul and the beat-up sedan pull away, leaving my long driveway empty. I closed the door, and the click was a perfect echo of the one from 10 years ago. But this time, it wasn't locking me out. It was locking them out. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of a chapter, finally, blessedly, closed. I stood in my silent, beautiful home, the sun streaming through the large windows, and for the first time, the chill of that long-ago autumn night was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady warmth that came from deep within. I was home.